He was known as a man who had everything. People spoke his name with respect, sometimes with fear and often with envy. Wherever he went, doors opened before he even reached them. His success was not hidden. It was loud, visible, and impossible to ignore. Tall buildings carried his signature. Business magazines printed his face. Important people waited for his approval. In the public eye, his life was a perfect example of what achievement looked like. Yet behind the high gates of his home, behind the polished floors and silent hallways, there was a quiet emptiness that no amount of money could fill. The house itself was enormous. It sat far away from the noise of the city, protected by walls, cameras, and guards. Inside, everything was clean, expensive, and carefully arranged. Furniture was chosen not for comfort but for appearance. Art hung on the walls not because anyone loved it, but because it showed taste and status. Every room felt finished, yet strangely lifeless. The man liked it that way. Order mattered to him. Silence meant control. He believed that a disciplined environment created strong people. Noise, emotions, and unnecessary conversations were distractions. He had built his empire with this mindset, and he believed the same rules applied to family. His son lived in that house like a guest, would overstay his welcome. The boy was young, still in his growing years, yet his eyes carried a tired look that did not belong to a child. He had everything other children dreamed of. His room was large, filled with toys he rarely touched. Shelves held books he never chose himself. Clothes were bought in perfect sizes, replaced before they even wore out. Tutors came regularly. Drivers waited on schedule. His future had already been planned down to the smallest detail. What he did not have was warmth. Mornings in the house followed a strict routine. The boy woke up early, often before anyone else. He dressed quietly, careful not to make noise. Breakfast was prepared and placed on the table, always nutritious, always proper. Sometimes the father sat across from him, reading messages on his phone or reviewing documents. Their conversations rarely went beyond simple questions. Did you finish your homework? Yes. Any tests today? No. Good. That was all the father believed. He was doing his duty. He paid for the best schools. He hired the best teachers. He ensured his son lacked nothing material. In his mind, love was shown through provision. Words, hugs, and long talks were unnecessary. His own childhood had taught him that survival mattered more than comfort. What he failed to see was how silence slowly shaped the boy into someone who felt invisible. At school, teachers described the boy as polite and intelligent. He completed his work on time and followed rules, but they noticed something missing. He rarely smiled. He avoided group activities. When praised, he showed no reaction. When corrected, he accepted it without emotion. He was present in body, absent in spirit. Reports were sent home. Emails were written carefully, choosing words that would not offend a powerful parent. The father read them quickly and dismissed them. He is focused, he said. Not everyone needs to be loud, and that was the end of the discussion. Back at home, the boy spent most of his time alone. He sat by the large windows, watching cars pass beyond the gates. Sometimes he imagined what it would be like to walk freely on the street, unnoticed, unimportant. He wondered how it felt to be called by name with affection instead of instruction. In that same house, moving quietly through corridors and rooms, was the maid. She had worked there for years. She arrived early, left late, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. Her uniform was always neat. Her movements were careful. She knew which rooms required silence and which ones required speed. She understood the unspoken rules of the house better than anyone. Unlike the others, she watched. She noticed how the boy's shoulders slumped as he walked. She saw how he pushed food around his plate without eating much. She observed how he flinched slightly when his father's voice echoed through the halls, even when no anger was present. She had raised children of her own. She knew the signs of loneliness. And what she saw worried her. Sometimes while cleaning nearby, she caught the boy staring at nothing for long moments. His eyes looked full, as if holding words that had nowhere to go. When she passed by, he often looked away quickly, as though he had been caught doing something wrong. One afternoon, she found him sitting on the floor of the library, surrounded by books he had not opened. He was not reading. He was simply there. "Why aren't you at your desk?" she asked gently, careful to keep her voice low. He shrugged. "I finished." She nodded and continued working, but something stayed with her. A child who finishes everything and still has nothing to do is not free. He is waiting. Days passed. The pattern did not change. The father continued his busy life. Meetings filled his calendar. Calls followed him everywhere. Even at home, his mind remained in boardrooms and negotiations. He believed presence meant physical location. As long as he returned home at night, his duty was done. The boy continued shrinking inward. One evening, during a formal dinner with guests, the boy sat quietly at the table. Conversations flowed around him, full of achievements and plans. No one addressed him directly. He ate slowly, carefully, as if trying not to exist. At one point, he dropped his spoon. The sound was small, but in the silent pause that followed, it felt loud. The father glanced at him briefly. "Be careful," he said. "Yes," the boy replied. That single word carried apology, fear, acceptance all at once. The maid watched from the corner of the room. She saw the boy's face tighten, then return to its usual blank calm. She felt something twist inside her chest. Later that night, while collecting dishes, she noticed the boy had barely touched his food. The plate was almost full. She hesitated, then quietly approached him. "Are you not hungry?" she asked. He shook his head. "I am. Then why didn't you eat?" He paused for a moment, then whispered, "It doesn't matter." Those words stayed with her long after she went home. The father never noticed the empty plate. As weeks turned into months, the distance between father and son grew wider. Not through conflict, but through absence. There were no arguments, no shouting, no obvious harm. Just a quiet neglect that slowly erased something important. The boy stopped asking questions. He stopped seeking approval. He learned that staying silent made life easier. The maid, however, could no longer ignore what she saw. She began finding small ways to speak to him. Simple comments while passing by, questions that required more than yes or no. She listened when he answered, even when his words were few. Slowly, he began to look at her when she spoke. It was not much, but it was something. And in a house full of wealth, power, and fame, that something was rare. The father remained unaware. He believed the quiet meant everything was fine. He did not know that silence can be the loudest cry of all. The next morning arrived quietly, as most mornings did in that house. Sunlight entered through wide glass windows, but failed to bring warmth into the rooms. The boy woke up before his alarm, as he often did. He lay still for a few moments, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of staff moving around downstairs. He did not feel tired, yet he did not feel rested either. It was a feeling he had grown used to, like carrying a weight he could not name. He got out of bed, washed his face, and dressed himself without help. He had learned to be independent early, not because anyone taught him, but because no one noticed whether he needed help or not. His reflection in the mirror showed a neat child with careful posture. But behind his eyes lived a quiet question he never asked out loud. Downstairs, breakfast waited on the table, arranged perfectly. The maid had prepared it with care, placing everything just as it was expected to be. When the boy entered the dining room, she gave him a small smile. He noticed it. He always did. It was the only smile in the house that did not expect anything in return. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The father entered a few minutes later. Already dressed in a sharp suit, his phone pressed to his ear. He spoke in firm, controlled tones, discussing numbers and deadlines. He nodded to his son without really looking at him, and took his seat at the head of the table. The boy began eating slowly. Each bite felt heavy, not because of the food, but because of the silence around him. He wanted to say something, anything, but he did not know what was allowed and what was not. He watched his father stand up suddenly, end the call. and check his watch. "I'll be late tonight," the father said. The boy nodded. "Okay." The word came out easily, without disappointment, without protest. It was a word he had practiced his whole life. After the father left, the house returned to its usual quiet state. The maid watched the boy carefully as she cleared the table. She noticed how he pushed his chair in gently, as if afraid of making noise, and how he lingered for a moment, unsure of where to go next. "School car will be here soon," she said. He nodded again. "I know." She wanted to say more, but years of working in that house had taught her caution. Still, her heart felt heavy. A child should not move through life like a shadow. At school, the boy sat in his usual seat near the window. Outside, other children laughed and talked during breaks. He watched them from a distance, not because he disliked them, but because he felt different, as if he belonged to another world entirely. When teachers asked questions, he answered correctly. When group work was assigned, he stayed quiet and let others lead. No one complained about him, but no one truly knew him either. When the school day ended, he returned home to the same quiet halls. The father was not there. The maid greeted him, asked about his day. He said it was fine. That was always his answer. That evening, as the maid folded laundry nearby, she noticed him sitting on the couch, staring at the blank television screen. "You don't want to watch something?" she asked. He shook his head. "It's okay," she hesitated. The boy's life continued in the same quiet rhythm, but something inside him was slowly changing. It was not something anyone else could see easily. From the outside, he still looked like the same well-behaved child. He followed rules, completed tasks, and spoke only when spoken to. But inside, his thoughts were growing heavier, more crowded. Filled with questions he did not know how to ask, he had begun to notice things more clearly. He noticed how other children talked about their parents with ease, complaining one moment and laughing the next. He noticed how teachers sometimes placed a gentle hand on a student's shoulder when they were upset. These small moments stayed with him long after the day ended. They felt important, yet unreachable, like something meant for others. At home, the father remained busy. His days were filled with decisions that affected thousands of people. He carried responsibility like armor, believing it made him strong. To him, emotions were distractions. He had trained himself to ignore them, to push through discomfort and focus only on results. This way of living had brought him success. He saw no reason to question it. When he looked at his son, he saw a child who caused no trouble. That was enough for him. He did not see the quiet withdrawal as a warning sign. He saw it as obedience. The maid, however, saw the change. She noticed that the boy spoke even less than before. His answers were shorter. His eyes often looked distant, as if he were somewhere else entirely. When she asked him simple questions, he responded politely, but without energy. It was as if each day took something small from him, and nothing ever gave it back. One afternoon, the boy returned from school earlier than usual. He walked into the house slowly, his bag hanging loosely from his shoulder. The maid was cleaning near the entrance and immediately sensed something was wrong. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on the floor. "Did something happen?" He hesitated. This time, he did not answer right away. His lips parted slightly, then pressed together again. Finally, he said, "I don't feel good." Those words were simple, but they carried weight. She guided him to the sofa and asked him to sit. She brought him a glass of water and waited patiently. She did not rush him. She did not interrupt the silence. After a long moment, he spoke again. "They asked us to draw our family." She listened. "Everyone was drawing and talking," he continued. "I didn't know what to draw." Her heart tightened. "Why?" He shrugged. "I don't know what we are." That sentence stayed in the air between them. She wanted to tell him something comforting, something wise, but she knew words alone would not fix what he felt. "Still," she said softly, "families can look many ways." He nodded, but the sadness did not leave his face. That evening, the father returned home later than usual. He was tired and irritated, his mind still caught in unfinished business. The maid debated with herself. She wanted to speak, but fear held her back. Speaking out of place in that house had consequences. She decided to wait. Days later, another message came from the school. This time, it was not about grades or behavior. It was about concern. The teacher wrote that the boy seemed emotionally distant and suggested a meeting. The father read the message with mild annoyance. He scheduled the meeting without much thought. During the meeting, the teacher spoke carefully. "Your son is doing well academically," she said, "but he seems withdrawn. He rarely connects with others." The father leaned back in his chair. "He's quiet. That's his nature." Perhaps the teacher replied, "But children also need emotional connection." The father ended the conversation politely but firmly. He left convinced that the issue was exaggerated. At home, the boy waited, unaware of the meeting. When his father walked past him without a word, something inside him sank deeper. That night, the maid found him sitting on the floor again, this time holding a piece of paper. It was the unfinished drawing. She sat beside him. "May I see?" she asked. He handed it to her. On the paper was a large house, drawn carefully. Two figures stood far apart inside it. One was small. One was tall. No faces. No hands reaching out. She swallowed hard. "You draw very well," she said. He looked at her. "Is it wrong?" "No," she replied. "It's honest." He did not fully understand the word, but he felt something shift when she said it. From that moment on, the maid became a quiet anchor in his life. She never crossed boundaries, never disrespected the father, but she listened. She remembered things the boy said. She asked how his day was and waited for the real answer. The father, unaware of this growing connection, continued believing everything was under control. But control is not the same as care. And slowly, the space between what the father believed and what the boy felt grew wider. This distance would soon demand to be noticed. Time passed, and with each passing day, the boy felt more aware of the space inside him. It was not just loneliness anymore. It was confusion. He did not understand why he felt empty when his life looked full from the outside. He did not know how to explain it, even to himself. All he knew was that something was missing, and no amount of comfort seemed to replace it. The maid continued her work as always, but her attention stayed quietly focused on the child. She noticed how he often watched his father from a distance, as if studying him, trying to understand something important. The boy rarely approached his father on his own. It was not fear exactly. It was uncertainty. He did not know what kind of response he would receive, so he chose silence instead. One evening, the father came home earlier than usual. His meetings had ended sooner, and for the first time in a long while, he had no urgent calls waiting. He walked into the living room and saw his son sitting there with a book open on his lap. The boy looked up, surprised. The father paused. "You're not at your desk," he said. "I finished," the boy replied. The father nodded and sat down across from him. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual. The boy's hands tightened slightly around the book. He waited, unsure of what was expected. "What are you reading?" the father asked. The boy glanced down. "It's just a story." "About what?" He hesitated. "About a boy who travels?" Father nodded again. "Travel teaches discipline," he said, more to himself than to the child. The conversation ended there. The father stood up and left the room, already drifting back into his thoughts. The boy watched him go, his chest tightening. Even when his father tried, it felt like something was always in the way. From the doorway, the maid had seen everything. She felt the familiar ache in her chest. The man did not realize how close he was and how far away at the same time. That night, the boy had trouble sleeping. His thoughts raced, replaying small moments again and again. He wondered if he was doing something wrong, if there was something about him that made connection difficult. Children often blame themselves for what they do not understand. The next day at school, the boy struggled to focus. During a group activity, another child joked loudly about parents who never had time. Laughter followed. The boy felt his face burn. He did not laugh. He stared at his desk until the moment passed. When he came home, He went straight to his room. The maid noticed his early return and followed quietly. "You're back early," she said. He nodded. "I don't feel good." She sat near the doorway. "Do you want to talk?" He shook his head at first, then stopped. After a long pause, he spoke. "Is it wrong to want someone to ask about your day?" Her heart broke a little. "No," she said gently. "It's not wrong at all." The words came out slowly after that. Not many, but honest. He spoke about school, about feeling different, about not knowing where he fit. She listened without judgment. She did not interrupt. Sometimes, listening is the greatest gift. Unbeknown to them, the father stood nearby, having returned earlier than expected. He heard part of the conversation. He froze, listening from the hallway. The words struck him in a way no business failure ever had. He did not step forward. He did not interrupt. Instead, he walked away quietly, his mind unsettled. That night, for the first time in years, the father could not focus on work. The boy's question echoed in his head. He felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him, something he had long buried. The maid, unaware of what the father had overheard, continued her quiet support. She knew change did not happen overnight, but she also knew that truth once heard could not be unheard. The distance in the house remained, but cracks had begun to form. Something was shifting. This was only the beginning of that change. The house felt different after that evening, even though nothing on the surface had changed. The same routines continued. The same quiet mornings, the same long absences, the same careful movements through wide rooms. But inside the father, something had shifted. He could not name it, but he felt it every time he looked at his son. He began noticing things he had ignored before. He noticed how the boy waited, how he hesitated before speaking, how his shoulders relaxed only when he was alone or when the maid was nearby. These small details disturbed him more than any problem at work. For the first time, he wondered if silence was not strength, but distance. The boy sensed the change too, though he did not understand it. His father looked at him more often now, as if trying to read something written in a language he had never learned. Sometimes the father opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Those moments filled the boy with both hope and fear. One afternoon, the father returned home unexpectedly early. There were no calls, no meetings waiting. He walked into the living room and saw his son sitting alone, drawing quietly. The maid stood nearby, folding clothes. "Leave us for a moment," the father said. The maid hesitated, then nodded and stepped away. The boy froze. He kept his eyes on the paper, his hands slightly shaking. "What are you drawing?" the father asked. The boy swallowed. "Just something may I see." Slowly, the boy held up the paper. It showed two figures sitting side by side. They were close, but not touching. The father stared at the drawing longer than expected. "Is this us?" he asked. The boy nodded, barely. Something tightened in the father's chest. He sat down across from his son, lowering himself to the child's level. It felt awkward, unfamiliar. "You don't talk much," he said carefully. The boy looked at him, confused. "I didn't think I should." "Why not?" The boy hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "You're always busy." The words were simple, but they landed hard. The father leaned back, breathing slowly. No one had ever spoken to him like this, not even adults. He realized then how intimidating his presence must feel to a child. "I didn't know," he said. The boy shrugged. "It's okay." But it was not okay. That night, the father could not sleep. Memories from his own childhood surfaced, memories he had buried under years of ambition. He remembered being alone, promising himself he would never be weak. Somewhere along the way, he had confused strength with distance. The next day, he did something unexpected. He cleared his schedule. When the boy returned from school, his father was waiting. "We're going for a walk," the father said. The boy blinked. "Now?" "Yes, now." They walked outside the gates for the first time together. No guards nearby, no phones ringing, just the two of them. At first they walked in silence. Then the father spoke. He asked about school, about books, about what the boy liked. The questions were clumsy, but they were real. The boy answered slowly at first, then with more confidence. He spoke about small things, then bigger ones. He spoke about feeling invisible. The father listened. When they returned home, the maid watched from the doorway, her eyes filled with quiet relief. This did not fix everything. Not yet. But it was the first real step, and for the first time, the boy felt seen. The days that followed were not perfect, but they were different. The change did not come suddenly, like a dramatic moment in a movie. It came slowly, quietly, through small actions that carried real meaning. The father began coming home earlier when he could. He sat at the table longer. He asked questions and waited for answers. Sometimes the answers were short, sometimes awkward, but he listened every time. For the boy, this new attention felt confusing at first. He had lived so long without it that he did not know how to respond. When his father asked about his day, he wondered if it was a test. When his father sat beside him, he waited for the moment it would end. Trust, once broken by distance, does not return easily. The maid noticed everything. She watched how the boy's posture slowly changed, how his shoulders were no longer always tense, how his eyes followed his father with cautious hope. She also noticed the father struggling. Being powerful in the world had not prepared him for being gentle at home. One evening, the father asked the boy to help him with something simple in the kitchen. It was an ordinary task, but to the boy it felt important. They worked side by side in silence at first. Then the father spoke. "I wasn't there when I should have been," he said. The boy froze. "I thought providing was enough," the father continued. "I was wrong." The boy did not answer immediately. He stared at the counter, his chest tight. "I didn't want much," he said finally. "I just wanted you." The words broke something open inside the father. He turned to his son and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. It was the first time he had done that in years. "I'm here now," said. Tears filled the boy's eyes, but he did not look away from that moment on. Their relationship began to rebuild itself piece by piece. There were setbacks. Old habits returned sometimes. The father still struggled with work, pulling him away. The boy still retreated into silence when he felt overwhelmed. But now there was communication. There was effort. The maid slowly stepped back, knowing her role was changing. She had opened a door, but it was not hers to walk through anymore. She felt peace in knowing she had helped in the way she could. One afternoon, the boy came home smiling. It was a small smile, but it was real. He told his father about something that had happened at school without being asked. The father listened, fully present. In that moment, the house felt warmer than it ever had. The father learned that money could build walls, but love was what made a home. He learned that power could control people, but kindness could reach hearts. And he learned that fame meant nothing if the people closest to him felt unseen. The boy learned that his voice mattered, that his feelings were real, that he was worthy of attention, not because of success or behavior, simply because he existed. The story did not end with perfection. It ended with understanding. And sometimes, that is the greatest success of all. Life began to move forward in a way that felt unfamiliar to everyone in the house. The changes that had started earlier were now becoming part of daily life. They were still small, still careful, but they were real. The father no longer saw his home as a place to rest between workdays. Slowly, it became a place where something important was happening. He started learning how to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Sitting quietly with his son without checking his phone felt strange, almost like wasting time. But over time, he began to understand that these quiet moments were not empty. They were full in a way he had never experienced before. The boy noticed the effort. He noticed when his father asked questions and did not rush the answers. He noticed when his father remembered small details like a school project or a book he liked. These moments made him feel unsure at first, but slowly they made him feel safe. One weekend, father suggested they spend the day together outside the house. The idea surprised the boy. He agreed, though his voice carried uncertainty. They went somewhere simple. No luxury, no guards, no attention. Just a quiet place where people walked freely. The boy watched his father closely, half expecting him to become impatient or distracted. But the father stayed. They talked about small things at first. The weather, the food they ate, the things they saw around them. Then, without planning it, the conversation became deeper. "Do you ever feel lonely?" the boy asked suddenly. The father stopped walking. He looked at his son and answered honestly for the first time. "Yes," he said, "more than I like to admit." That answer changed something between them. The boy realized his father was not just a powerful figure. He was human. He had feelings he had hidden for years. Back at home, the maid watched them return together, talking quietly. She felt relief. Her role was almost finished now. She had planted a seed. It was growing. But growth is never simple. As the father became more involved at home, pressures from the outside world increased. Work demanded more of him. People questioned his changing priorities. He felt pulled in two directions. One night, he came home late again. The boy waited, but eventually fell asleep on the couch. When the father saw him there, something inside him broke. He realized how easily old patterns could return. He carried his son to bed gently, promising himself he would not lose what they had started. The next day, he made a difficult decision. He stepped back from some responsibilities. It was not easy. People did not understand. But for the first time, he chose presence over power. The boy felt the difference immediately. He began speaking more. He laughed sometimes. He shared worries without being asked. The emptiness inside him did not disappear completely, but it no longer felt endless. The father learned that healing was not about one big moment. It was about choosing the same thing again and again. And in that house, once filled only with silence, something new was learning how to breathe. The changes in the house were now clear, not just in actions, but in feeling. The silence that once felt heavy had softened. It was no longer filled with fear or distance. Instead, it held space for understanding. The father and the boy were still learning each other, still making mistakes. But they were no longer strangers living under the same roof. The boy woke up one morning feeling something new. It was not excitement exactly, but it was close. It was the feeling that the day might hold something good. He did not rush out of bed. He lay there for a moment, listening. The house sounded different now, less empty, more alive. Downstairs, the father was already awake. He was not on his phone. He was making breakfast, slowly, imperfectly. When the boy entered the kitchen, he stopped, surprised. "Sit," the father said. "I'm trying something." The boy sat, watching carefully. The food was simple, not perfect, but it was warm. When the father placed the plate in front of him, their eyes met for a brief second. Neither looked away. They ate together in quiet comfort. It was not awkward like before. It felt earned. Later that day, the boy shared something he had never shared before. He talked about his fears, about worrying he would never be enough, about feeling pressure he never understood. The father listened without interrupting. When the boy finished, the father spoke softly. "I put that pressure there," he said. "Not because of you, but because I didn't know another way." Those words lifted something heavy from the boy's chest. The maid watched from a distance. Knowing her presence was no longer needed the way it once was, she felt proud not of herself, but of what had grown in that house. Life outside continued. Work remained demanding. Challenges did not disappear. But now the father had clarity. He knew what mattered most. The boy began to grow differently now. Not just older, but stronger inside. He spoke up more. He trusted his voice. One evening, as they sat together, the boy asked, "Will it always be like this?" The father thought for a moment. "No," he said honestly, "but I will always try." A promise mattered more than perfection. The house that once held only money, power, and fame now held something far more valuable, connection, and that made all the difference. Life continued to move forward, but it did not rush. The changes that had taken place needed time to settle, like dust slowly falling after a storm. The house no longer felt like a place built only for display. It was becoming a place where real moments lived. The boy was changing in ways that were not loud or dramatic. He was growing more confident in small steps. He spoke a little louder. He asked questions without fear. He no longer waited for permission to exist. These were quiet victories, but they mattered deeply. The father noticed these changes with mixed emotions. Pride warmed his chest, but guilt followed close behind. He often wondered how much pain his son had carried alone before he finally noticed. That thought stayed with him, reminding him to stay present. One evening, they sat together in the living room, not doing much at all. The boy was drawing while the father read nearby. The silence between them felt comfortable now. It was no longer something to escape. The boy looked up suddenly. "Can I show you something?" The father put his book down immediately. "Of course." The boy handed him a drawing. This time, it showed two figures standing close together, their hands almost touching. The father felt his throat tighten. "It's better," the boy said quietly. "Yes," the father replied. "It is." The maid watched this exchange from a distance. She felt peace knowing the child no longer needed her in the same way. Her work was almost done. Outside the house, life tested the father again. A serious challenge arose at work, one that demanded long hours and hard decisions. Old habits tried to return, but now he was aware. One night, exhausted, he sat alone and thought about what he wanted his son to remember one day. That question guided his choices. The boy, meanwhile, began forming friendships at school. Slowly, carefully, but honestly. He learned that connection did not always lead to loss. The house held laughter sometimes now. Quiet laughter, but real. This was not the end of the story. It was the proof that healing continues. One day at a time, the passage of time brought clarity that neither the father nor the boy had expected. Life did not suddenly become easy, but it became more honest. The walls that once stood between them were thinner now, slowly breaking down through effort and intention. The boy had begun to understand his own feelings better. When he felt sad, he no longer thought it was wrong. When he felt happy, he no longer waited for it to disappear. He allowed himself to feel fully, something he had never learned before. The father watched this growth with quiet amazement. He realized how much strength it took for a child to heal without blame. It forced him to look inward, to face parts of himself he had avoided for years. One night, they sat together outside, watching the sky grow dark. The boy spoke about his dreams, not about success or money, but about simple things. About feeling safe, about feeling close. The father listened, truly listened, and understood that these dreams mattered more than any legacy he could build alone. Inside the house, the maid prepared to leave soon. Her work there was nearly complete. She felt peace knowing she had helped guide something fragile toward safety. The father thanked her quietly, not with words that drew attention, but with respect that felt sincere. The boy noticed. And for the first time, he saw kindness modeled without power behind it. The house, once defined by control and distance, now reflected patience and care. This chapter of their lives was not an ending. It was a continuation. Built on trust, the next weeks unfolded with steady movement rather than sudden change. The father made small choices every day that showed his son he mattered. He came home earlier when he could. He asked questions and waited for answers. He learned that listening was not passive, but active work. The boy noticed everything. Children always do. He noticed when his father sat beside him instead of across the room. He noticed when his father put the phone away. These moments built trust slowly, like bricks placed one by one. At school, the boy faced challenges too. There were days when he felt unsure and days when old fears returned. But now, he talked about them. At night, he shared his thoughts openly, knowing he would not be dismissed. The father did not always have the right words. Sometimes he stayed quiet, offering presence instead of advice. That was enough. The maid prepared to move on with her life. Before leaving, she spoke privately with the father. She told him that the boy had always been strong, even when he felt small. The father listened carefully, knowing those words carried truth. On her last day, the boy hugged her without hesitation. There were no dramatic goodbyes, just gratitude. After she left, the house felt different again, but not empty. It felt steady. The father understood now that success meant showing up, even when it was uncomfortable. Especially then, the boy fell asleep one night feeling safe in a way he never had before. This part of the story continued. Not with perfection, but with effort. And that effort changed everything. Days passed quietly, but each day carried meaning. The father began to understand that healing was not something that happened once. It was something that needed care every single day. He learned to notice his son's moods, the way his shoulders dropped when he felt unsure, the way his eyes lit up when he felt heard. One evening, the boy came home looking tired. He did not speak much at first. The father did not push him. They sat together, and only after some time did the boy begin to talk. He spoke about feeling left out at school, about wondering if something was wrong with him. The father felt a familiar pain in his chest. But this time, he did not turn away from it. He told his son something honest. He said that feeling different did not mean being broken. He said that even grown men sometimes feel alone. The boy listened closely. Hearing that his father was not perfect made him feel less afraid of his own feelings. That night, the boy slept more peacefully than he had in years. At work, the father faced pressure that would have once consumed him. Meetings ran long. Expectations were high. But now, when he felt overwhelmed, he thought of his son sitting at home, waiting. That thought kept him grounded. The house continued to change. It no longer felt like a place of rules and silence. It felt lived in. Sometimes things were left unfinished. Sometimes emotions were messy. But they were real. The father realized something important. He had spent years teaching his son how to behave, but he had never taught him how to feel. Now, he was learning alongside him. The boy began to show small signs of confidence. He raised his hand in class. He made one friend. Just one, but it mattered. One night, as the boy was getting ready for bed, he asked a simple question. "Are you proud of me?" The father did not hesitate. "I am proud of you every day," he said. Those words stayed with the boy as he drifted to sleep. This story did not end here. It kept moving forward, built on small truths and daily effort. And that was how real change finally took root. The season began to change. And with it came a quiet shift inside the house. The days grew shorter, and the evenings felt calmer. The boy had settled into a rhythm that felt safe. He woke up without the tight feeling in his chest that once followed him everywhere. The father noticed these changes in small ways. The boy laughed more easily now. He no longer flinched at raised voices, even when they came from the television. He had learned that not every loud sound meant anger. One afternoon, the father made a decision he would have avoided in the past. He declined an important invitation for work. It was not because the work did not matter, but because he understood something new. Some moments, once missed, could never be recovered. Instead, he went home early. When the boy saw him, surprise crossed his face. Followed by a smile he tried to hide. They spent the evening together doing nothing special. They cooked, they talked, and they shared stories about their day. These ordinary moments slowly became the most valuable ones. The boy asked questions about his father's past, about his childhood, about mistakes he had made. The father answered honestly, even when it was uncomfortable. He knew that truth built stronger bonds than perfection. At night, the father sat alone and reflected. He realized that money, power, and fame had once been shields. They protected him from feelings he did not know how to face. Now, he was learning to live without those shields inside his own home. The boy continued to grow, not just in confidence, but in empathy. He noticed when his father seemed tired. He offered quiet support in his own simple way. One night the boy said something that stayed with the father. He said, "I like it when you are just here." Those words meant more than any praise the father had ever received. Life did not suddenly become perfect. There were still misunderstandings. There were still difficult days. But now, They faced them together. This part of their journey showed that real strength was not loud. It was steady, and it was built, day by day, through presence and care.